Great. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on very short notice. My name is David Halpern, CEO of Israel Policy Forum. Thank you all for taking the time on this really historic Friday the 13th, this historic day in which Israel has gone to war with Iran. We have talked about this day, analyzed what this might look like for years, for decades even. There have been debates and arguments over the best way of stopping Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. We have argued over whether Israel would have the capacity or the opportunity to strike at Iran and its nuclear facilities. And all of the debates are now playing out in real time. All of the scenarios we are now seeing play out in this very rapidly moving situation, rapidly moving developments, of course, with Israel beginning to strike at Iran over the last 24 hours. I want to thank our guests for being able to join us on short notice, as well as all of you participating. And I want to encourage you all to join the conversation by asking questions throughout the conversation. Please don't wait for a Q&A session. Just put your questions in right away using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. We are joined today by Ambassador Dan Shapiro, of course, a longtime friend of Israel Policy Forum, who served as ambassador, of course, to Israel during the Obama administration and served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under the Biden administration. He is currently a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Dan is going to be with us for quite a bit, and then we'll have to step out. But we are also joined today, thrilled to be joined by Israel Policy Forum's Washington Managing Director and Senior Fellow Rachel Brandenburg, as well as our Research Director and the Diane and Guilford Glazer Foundation Senior Fellow, Shira Efron.
I apologize. We just got a siren alert. Sorry, I'll join after Dan leaves and try to not repeat everything. Sorry, everyone.
And this would not be the first, second, or third webinar we've had in which there's been sirens over the past 2 years since October 7. And that's just a reality of this unfolding situation, of course. I want to get right into it, Dan, and use as much time as we can and really encourage all those questions to come in. Dan, what do you make of the last 24 hours? How did we get here?
Thanks, David. Good to be with you and everybody. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And good to see Shira. Hope everybody is safe as the sirens sound in Israel.
Sorry, it's not a siren. We just get those, like, it was a false siren telling us to be ready for sirens. So anyway, sorry.
Great. Glad you're still with us. David, you mentioned Israel going to war with Iran, and I think that's an accurate description, but I don't think this is the beginning of that war. Of course, for years, there's been what was known as the shadow war, sometimes the war between the wars, as Iran through its proxies and Israel in various deniable ways, and Syria and Lebanon and other places would strike back and forth at each other. It was really Iran that lifted the cover off of that and broke the taboo on state-on-state violence on April 13th last year. And then again on October 1st last year with the two major barrages against Israel. And following those attacks, certainly Israel responded to the October one with a very significant strike of its own, somewhat coordinated with the United States on October 26th. But really following those attacks, I think Israel felt it needed to prepare itself for conducting direct strikes against Iran, as it has now done over the last 24 hours, and they're ongoing. And it's really quite stunning what they have achieved. This is a multifaceted strike against Iranian nuclear targets. We know that the Natanz enrichment facility has been hit and significantly damaged, against ballistic missile launch sites, against air defense sites, and very significant military and regime leadership targets from the IRGC, from the Iranian military, from the Iranian Air Force, the Supreme National Security Council. And that has really caused obviously significant damage at all those sites, but also has thrown the Iranian leadership into a lot of chaos. And it has really raised questions about Iran's ability to defend itself and even to project power in response. I think overnight we saw Iran try to launch 100 or so drones toward Israel, and it sounds like they were all intercepted and shot down before they reached Israel. It's very similar to what happened last year on April 13th. So what this Israeli operation really lays bare, of course, is the depth of the Iranian miscalculation following Hamas's October 7th attack against Israel. Iran goaded its Lebanese proxy, Hezbollah, into the war, and that led to Hezbollah's very, very severe destruction, decimation in September of last year. The Assad regime in Syria fell. Iran did break that taboo on state attacks, but wasn't very effective in what they were able to achieve in April and October. And then they suffered rather significantly when Israel responded against their air defenses and ballistic missile production sites last October. But now, in light of what's happening today, and now that the taboo is lifted on state attacks, Israel's really demonstrated that it has full penetration of Iran and the ability to wreak havoc across the Iranian system. Frankly, I think Iran has never looked weaker, and its ability to respond meaningfully is going to be tested. It doesn't mean they don't have ability to respond, and I expect we will see them continue to try through drones, almost certainly through ballistic missiles, and very likely through asymmetric means, through proxies or through terrorist attacks. But their ability to do so, especially with their leadership in this degree of chaos, is somewhat in question. So it's very impressive what Israel's achieved, but that's not the end of the story, obviously. First of all, the Israeli attacks are ongoing, and Prime Minister Netanyahu says they may last for a week or 2 weeks until Israel is satisfied that the threat of Iranian nuclear capability and ballistic missile capabilities no longer threatens Israel. But you really have to ask the question whether Iran now will face a kind of supreme motivation to do what it has not done yet, but now may, which is to try to sprint to a nuclear breakout at their hardened underground facilities, particularly the one at Fordo, which apparently has not been hit yet. I think the Israel motivation to act now, and something clearly that's been many years or months anyway in the planning, was new information about Iran's expansion of its enrichment to the point where even the IE said publicly Iran now has nearly 10 bombs worth of 60% enriched uranium, which on very short notice they could enrich to weapons grade. And that timeline had shrunk down to days before Iran could do what's called breakout. And also additional information about advancements in Iran's weaponization program, so that their ability to actually build the weapon once they had the enriched uranium had that timeline had also shrunk. And I think they came to the Trump administration and said, we can give the president 60 days, as he said. They clearly wouldn't act before his 60-day deadline, but we aren't going to wait much beyond that. My guess is they got something between a yellow and a green light from President Trump. And that's why they acted now. But now that Iran has been shown to be so vulnerable, I think that question of whether they will feel they must act to build the ultimate deterrent for even the regime's survival of a nuclear weapon or do that nuclear breakout is really in question. Now, the United States is certainly going to assist Israel with defense against Iranian retaliation. But President Trump and his team have tried to distance themselves from the attack itself. Surely they had foreknowledge. Surely there was some coordination or deconfliction simply because the Israeli Air Force was operating in locations like Syria and Iraq where the U.S. military is present. But they are trying to avoid drawing direct Iranian response against the United States. But what President Trump has aspired to, and I think even in recent minutes has spoken to our colleague Barack Ravid at Axios about, is to go back to a diplomatic resolution of the nuclear issue, a no enrichment, full and dismantlement deal, which he had tried to get Iran to agree to, and Iran had not agreed to. My guess, it's only a guess, but my guess is that that's dead for the time being, that it would be nearly impossible for Iran, in light of this attack, to accept what it had previously refused to accept. That would appear to be a capitulation. And until they at least can muster a response, and again, they're going to at least go through the decision-making process of a breakout scenario, I don't see getting back into that diplomatic process. And so President Trump may find himself faced sooner than later with that decision of whether the United States would need to come to participate with its unique capabilities to destroy Iran's underground nuclear facilities to prevent that breakout to a nuclear weapon. And that's a very tough decision. He's been clear he wants to stay out of Middle East wars. A decision like that would, I think, split his advisors, split his political base. Certainly, there would be some accusations flying around. We already hear some of them that Israel is trying to drag the United States into this war. And so those are big and tough decisions he may face that have implications for the U.S.-Israel relationship and the trust and coordination between us, maybe for future U.S. military assistance to Israel, as we're within a year or so of needing to negotiate another MOU for the next round of military assistance. It may even affect the conversations between Israel and the United States about how to wind down the war in Gaza. So there's some big decisions coming from the Iranian side, and that may trigger very big and fateful decisions on the U.S. side. Why don't I pause there, David?
So much to unpack, so much to unpack. I think you of course noted that this is made possible really by the decimation of Hezbollah, which had largely been Israel's insurance policy against an attack just like this. And I think it's really difficult, at least to understand or unpack how this impacts this diplomatic effort and this two-step that we see from the administration, both obviously enabling this, giving it a green light, and still wanting to pursue the diplomatic track, as you said. The questions have already begun to flow in, and there's two comments that are rampant throughout the two questions. And one is, does Israel have the bunker busting bombs? And the second is, there are many people who want to fact check you that Israel has indeed begun to strike at Fordo. According to various Israeli reports. And that's related to the bunker busting question, which is, does Israel have the capacity to reach that nuclear facility that is buried deep inside a mountain?
Right. So I've been doing a lot of calls this morning and early afternoon, and may have missed the most recent reports. Indeed, if there are attacks ongoing near Fordo, that's important information to factor in. I don't want to be too specific about systems, but the United States has capabilities that are relevant to addressing the Fordo challenge, and they are capabilities Israel does not have. That does not mean Israel does not have an ability to address that target. Whether they can achieve what the United States can achieve, at least with the use of aerial bombs, I think is in question. It doesn't mean they can't damage it. How much time that would buy, how much it would set back Iran's ability to actually conduct enrichment and maybe even a breakout at that location. I think there's a question of how much they could achieve. But I think, as we've already seen, Israel has shown incredible ingenuity and has come with surprises. And there may be means other than aerial bombing that are relevant to how you would disable a facility like that, or at least put time on the clock before it could be used to execute a nuclear breakout. So the United States and Israel don't have identical capabilities. I think that's important to state. And there are things the United States could do that are relevant to that site. And again, I don't like to be too specific about it, that only the United States can do. But I don't rule out Israel's ability with its creativity and ingenuity to bring other solutions that might be relevant.
Yeah. Sure, I want to bring you in just to hear the perspective from Israel. What are you hearing from Israel? Is being communicated to the broader public? Any insights you have on what exactly is the targeted strategy, the end game, the goals of this new campaign?
Hi again, everyone. So I agree with everything Dan said. Obviously, the main discussion in Israel, the main focus is now on this what looks like an incredible planning. And so far, and I'll say so far, we're 17 hours in, I think. What looks like an incredible operational success, right? And we got to give kudos to what Israel did, and I think the questions about, right, the bunker busters and the way it's always perceived that, how you go about Iranian military facilities, and Israelis were always said, we're not going to do it like the Americans because we're not America and we have other skills and other creativity. The main focus now in Israel is, there's I think across the political spectrum, there's support for these actions. In fact, Netanyahu has been criticized throughout the years for not having the courage to go all the way. And certainly during this war. And so we're seeing across the board support for this. Interestingly, and this is where I think what's communicated is not necessarily where the Israeli government is. Tzachi Hanegbi, who is the head of the Israeli National Security Council, the Israeli Malal, the NSC, just said something that on TV, where it was a very sober interview, which was something we're missing, unlike the US, where the president speaks to the public all the time. We don't have this type of leadership at the moment that speaks to the Israeli public. But Tzachi Hanegbi did say that Israel realizes I'm paraphrasing, obviously, the limits of military power. And the goal is to weaken Iran's capacity so it comes to the negotiation tables, or that you find some sort of diplomatic solution. God give me the optimism that President Trump has and Tzachi Hanegbi, that this brings Iran to some sort of negotiation table. I just don't. I mean, we're not seeing the Iranians there. And I also got to tell you that I think that the fact that Tzachi Hanegbi said it, it's to me, I can't see Israel stopping in the middle of what is a successful operation, right? And we know that Israel had considered various modes of operations, and it chose the most maximalist of all options. So to stop in the middle now, it's just to me something that I don't see Israel really wanting to do. And fortunately for Israel, I just don't see the Iranians going there. We have to realize that, sitting in Israel, there was now an alert to stay near a protected area, near a shelter, but the retaliation hasn't started, right? And Iran will retaliate. And it's true that Israel has decapitated a lot of, the leadership and the military leadership, and lots of ballistic missiles and other capabilities. But Iran is still a competent country, and it can still strike Israel, and it will. And I think then the questions will come to the extent to which Israel is able to defend itself. And the question is also, to what extent the US will defend Israel. I don't know, Dan, and probably those numbers are classified, but I don't know actually how many interceptors US forces have in the region at the moment. I am not convinced was at the time when you were in the government, right? The Biden administration preparing for this. And these are real questions. At the end of the day, it's kinetics. Jordan obviously intercepted the drones over its territory. Unclear how many, all the other regional partners, how involved they will be. I think they're also weighing their options. There's not a lot of love for Iran, right? But they are trying to protect themselves, defend themselves from the neighborhood bully. They don't want to look like they're complicit with this. And because this is perceived, although I agree with Dan that this is Iran started, right, in April, but this is perceived as a preliminary Israeli strike. So we are really in the middle of the event. The last point I'll say about this, and this is where, in terms of Israel, you do hear voices talking about this could trigger the regime change, which arguably was the real ambition of Netanyahu. So they're not saying it now, but decapitation of the military leadership. But next in line, we know who we're talking about. The expectation is, the hope is that the Iranian public will go to the streets again. Again, we don't know. This can go either way. They can be bolstered or weakened. We don't know. And that the US will join. So speaking about the bunker busters and more capabilities, and again, because President Trump says one thing and then says another thing, and we had all assumed that he doesn't want to be dragged into a Middle East war. Yes, he's the one, yet he's the one enabling it. I wouldn't be surprised if the next escalatory stage does come with a more of a robust U.S. Support, not actually fighting for Israel, but supplying capabilities. So that's where the Israeli discussion is at the moment.
Yeah, I wanted to bring in Rachel for a question that's related to what you were touching on, Shira, which is the like force posture of the United States in the region and the nature in which the U.S. was preparing for this before and now after this attack. Robert Marcus asked, does it appear the Trump administration has deployed the same assets and coordinated allied support that the Biden administration did last year for the defense of Israel's homeland in the event of a ballistic missile attack? And it speaks to Shira's comment about the interceptors. I'm wondering, Rachel, if you could just sort of unpack where the U.S. is at in the region and what you've been following in the last week leading up to this.
Sure, I might throw the force posture question back to Ambassador Shapiro when I'm done.
Yeah.
But I think one thing I think about is we do have, and Shira mentioned this, we have a very capable military. CENTCOM has sort of done a variety of very complicated exercises. They've practiced regional defense, and General Kurilla, in particular, as commander of CENTCOM, has worked with all of these partners before. So whether this was a yellow light, a green light, a please don't do it, but you're going to anyway type of situation, clearly there was some amount of US awareness, and I have to expect some amount of posturing for defense, certainly of our own people and assets, but presumably also of our partners. So between Israeli military capability, our own military capability, and regional partner defensive capabilities, I am hopeful that whatever operations proceed, there will continue to be coordination. I worry more about what comes next. And what about the diplomacy? How does President Trump get the Iranians back to the table? I don't see a world in which that happens right now, certainly amidst ongoing operations. And if regime change is the objective, which Israel is forecasting days more of operations, there are only so many people to go after amidst military leadership and even scientists and sort of other elements of the nuclear program in Iran. So if regime change is part of this, then what does that look like? Sort of, does Israel have an end game in mind? Is the US coordinated enough to be thinking through that end game, and how do you get back to the table? And then what happens at the table and what happens in a diplomatic scenario? That's where I'm less confident that our current administration is appropriately postured diplomatically, not militarily, to be able to sort of work this the way that we want it to end up.
Ambassador Shearbeer, on the military side, is the United States prepared to come to the defense against a ballistic missile attack in the same nature that it was in the last administration?
I think the United States is able to significantly contribute to helping defend Israel. We generally maintain offshore in the Eastern Mediterranean ballistic missile defense capable cruisers and destroyers. I suspect those vessels are near the Israeli shore or can easily get there. Last October, President Biden deployed a THAAD battery. That's a very sophisticated high altitude missile defense capability to Israel. It's been used actually to help defend against ballistic missiles launched by the Houthis. And there are reports anyway that a second THAAD battery was deployed to Israel about a month ago. So if that's the case, that's a significant capability to bolster Israel's own Arrow and David Sling missile defense capabilities. Iron Dome is less relevant for these longer range munitions. And then, of course, the U.S. Air Force has the ability to help do the interceptions of drones, as it did during the April 13th attack last year, and may have last night. We don't know all of the details of who downed those 100 Iranian drones. Certainly the Israeli Air Force, perhaps the Jordanian Air Force, perhaps Saudis if it was over their airspace, and perhaps the United States if it was positioned to participate. So we likely have some of those forces to help defend, and I think the likelihood of continuing to help defend Israel is very high. But going from defense to offense is the real nub of the dilemma and decision. And we don't necessarily have everything you would want to have in the region to be able to be that forward-leaning if the president was inclined to do it. There's one aircraft carrier in the region. Earlier in his administration, there were two. So there's some possibility you would bring another carrier strike group, additional air assets, fighter squadrons and tankers and search and rescue helicopters and the like. But again, that very much depends on if the president has any inclination to be involved in this fight, to do the things only the United States can do. That could be in response to something Iran does, whether it's kinetic or whether it's doing a breakout toward a nuclear weapon, or it could be, if there's no chance of a diplomatic resumption. I think as long as the president, as he said today, hopes to resume diplomacy, I think it suggests that he would try to give that space and time, which, to Shira's point, isn't going to happen during the operations. But if you could get a sooner than later kind of wind down of operations, maybe there's a window of that. But again, that's got to be measured against Iran looking at whether, for its own survivability, it believes it needs a deterrent that it lacked. As you mentioned, it lost a critical deterrent in Hezbollah, which was supposed to be its second strike capability against Israel. It's lost the ability to defend against many of these Israeli attacks. And so if you're an Iranian leader, a surviving Iranian leader, and you're asking yourself, what would enable us to hold off attempts at regime change or further body blows to the regime? Certainly in that conversation is crossing a nuclear threshold they have so far not crossed.
Mm. Ambassador Shapiro, just before you go, I welcome any last thoughts you have, but in particular about the wider region. Is there any evidence to suggest that there are regional players that either enabled the airspace or assisted in any way? And what are you watching in terms of the broader regional response?
Every other country, I think, that has in the region that has spoken to this issue so far has condemned the attack. That's to be expected. All of those countries, Jordan, Gulf states, I don't know whether Egypt has, are eager to not be seen by Iran to have played any role or let their airspace or assets or the bases that the U.S. operates out of in their countries have been involved in the attack to prevent Iran from having a motivation to strike them in response. My AirPods are dying. I'm going to turn this off for 1 second.
You've been doing too many of these this morning, Dan. That's the No, we don't hear you. Sorry. Still no. Well, while oh, we almost heard you there, Dan.
Can you hear me now?
Now we hear you.
Okay, my apologies. Too many calls on 2 week AirPods. So again, just to complete the thought, I think that's a strong motivation for countries to deny any role and to publicly criticize. But I suspect there's probably a fair bit of private cheering in rooms in palaces throughout the Gulf where there's no love lost for Iran, where there are relationships with the Israeli military and intelligence forces, some more acknowledged, some less acknowledged. But I think there's probably a lot of people who are very impressed by what Israel is achieving, eager to see Iran's capability of projecting power in the region, or certainly developing that nuclear threat, reduced, but also a bit on pins and needles about where this could escalate and what kind of decisions Iran could take in the next turn.
Yeah. Great, Dan. I know if you have to hop, appreciate your taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe, Shira, and good to see everybody.
Great. We will continue to take as many questions as you all have for Rachel and Shira, and I encourage you to do so using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Shira, I want to bring you in again. There's questions about, is there broad support in Israel? I think that is the case, right, from the coalition through the opposition. But I'm curious about the messaging to the Israeli public about you mentioned Tzachi Hanegbi saying that this is not actually going all the way on the nuclear program. What about regime change? Is that the narrative inside Israel about regime change? And to what extent is that part of the discussion?
It's not the narrative, but it's always been in the cards. Netanyahu has spoken about it throughout the years. He had a few videos that he recorded to the Iranian public. By the way, I think such a video would be sensible now, right? When this strike was happening and not randomly a month or so ago. But it's not something that's communicated to the Israeli public. I think we're in the Israeli euphoria stage. We got to say, when support, right, when you the intelligence that supported this operation, both in terms of identifying the targets, but also in planting actual operational capabilities in Iran, right? Aman, the Director of Military Intelligence, and Mossad has been pretty incredible, and the Air Force executing this. So I think Israel at the moment is just looking at that. The question is, and this is sort of a question, I don't want to ruin the party, but there are two things. And again, we're 17 hours in, so we have no idea how this is going to develop. And there's Fordo, and we knew all along. I mean, all those of us who work in this field, right? We knew it's not going to be like one strike and that's it. It's going to be multiple rounds, especially without the Moab and the bunker busters and all these capabilities. It was very clear that it's going to be multiple rounds and Natanz and Fordo and all these other sides. However, Iran has been doing everything we've known about Iran, sort of developing its weapon program, advancing its weapons program. The IAEA report was very severe last week, and it's, by the way, it's not just Israelis and Americans. If you spoke to the Brits in the last few weeks, they were even more on alarm than the Americans on this. But Iran has not decided to break into a bomb, or at least we don't know that it was. This is something that now Israel says we had evidence that they did, but Israel is the only party with this making this claim at the moment. And the question is that if Israel is unable to eliminate everything that Iran has, and that would depend on whether the US joins in or not, and there's no diplomatic solution, Iran can choose either way. You can say, okay, we're down, we will negotiate. But Iran can also say, no, this is the time we're breaking into a bomb, because a bomb, if we had nuclear weapons now, it would have deterred Israel from conducting this strike. So there are the missiles that Israel is attacking and the different sites, but Iran has accumulated over 400 kilograms of weapons grade enriched uranium, which I could tell you that, if we said this, right, Rachel, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, no one would have expected. This can be very quickly enriched to the 90% and paired with even to create just a few bombs, to build a few bombs. And this is something that we will have to know if Israel has maybe in the short term, help stave off the Iranian nuclear threat, but also at the same time pushed Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. And then the delay could be between 2 years and 4 years, but definitely not what such a strike is supposed to bring. So the jury is still out on this, and I do hope that if this decision was already accepted, that it will be right, that we will be successful in eliminating the Iranian nuclear program.
Yeah.
The next question is that where is diplomacy in all of that? If you look at Israel, post-October 7, right? We're looking at what's happening, the amazing military achievements in Lebanon, right? With the decapitation of Hezbollah. But still, an unwillingness at the moment, at least, to give up on the territory that Israel sort of reoccupied during this war. Syria is sort of like on and off. We're occupying territory. We're not occupying. We want to talk to Ashara. We don't like this Julani jihadist in a suit, back and forth. West Bank with a very aggressive campaign to topple the Palestinian Authority, essentially weaken the Palestinian Authority, not engaging in the multiple opportunities that this strikes could create in the region. And of course, the war in Gaza. The fact is that there are 53 Israeli hostages remaining in Gaza. 20 of them are alive, suffering beyond anything human. And I'm talking about the Israelis, right? There's tremendous suffering also on the Palestinian side in Gaza. There's no comparison or anything. But from an Israeli perspective, where is this going? And can Israel, after this major achievement, finally say yes to diplomacy and finish complement this military instrument, which looks very impressive, with a diplomatic one, and securing its position in the region, not just by kinetic power. And I think this is a conversation that is not happening at the moment in Israel, but will probably start happening quite soon.
There's a lot of questions about that diplomatic strategy, Rachel. I wanted to bring you in because there's sort of two-pronged questions, which we've touched on a bit thus far. One is the question about the Trump administration. Was this part of a wide misinformation campaign that Trump was actually going for a deal when actually it was a misdirection to keep the Iranian IRGC and whatnot to take them off guard, and just generally your takeaways, your thoughts 17 hours in on the reactions you're hearing broadly in Washington.
Sure. And I just to add to something Shira was saying, and I think we agree because we've talked about this. To me, what we're seeing are these sort of very exquisite military operations that are being conducted extremely well. At the end of the day, they're all tactical if Israel is not able to bring sort of to the next step she was talking about of diplomacy. And that's what would change the strategic sort of framework of the region, the sort of grand bargain, grand realignment that's been talked about for a number of years, but it has to be beyond military. On deception campaign, I don't have any reason to believe that the negotiations were all part of a deception campaign. I think President Trump genuinely wanted to reach a deal. I think he prefers deals to wars. I think most of what he's been saying for the past 60 days about this is the chance, we want a deal, it's got to be a good deal, et cetera, was really trying to push Iran toward a deal. I do wonder if the last 36 hours of commentary were more about deception. It was as I was watching things from the time that the United States announced that they were drawing down personnel from Embassy Baghdad and military dependence around the region, and some of the things that we're saying. One of the things I think you and I talked about was like, is this a deception campaign? Sort of, it was textbook from the things I studied in grad school of how these work and what different leaders say. I certainly believe that perhaps the US was in on a bit of deception for the 24 hours or so before negotiations. I still do think President Trump genuinely wants to get back to diplomacy. As everyone has said over the last 40 minutes, I don't think he wants to be dragged into a war. I don't think anyone in the region wants to be dragged into the war. Um, I just question whether there's actually the capability and sort of the political prowess to be able to get us there.
In terms of like congressional Washington and Senate, like anything notable that you're following in terms of the political um, debates and discussions on this in Washington in the last 17 hours?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting to see how quickly a number of congressional members have fallen in line behind Israel. Some haven't, and some have sort of said something initially and walked it back a little bit. There's obviously a lot of confusion. Um, I think people genuinely didn't know that this was going to happen on the Hill. Maybe some offices and some leadership did, but I've talked to a number of people for whom this was quite a surprise. So this doesn't seem to have been a widely coordinated operation in Washington, if it was at all coordinated with the United States. But the extent to which a number of members, and not just sort of traditional suspects, are falling in line to say, we support Israel, we support Israel's defense, this is your chance, go get Iran, has been somewhat surprising to me. I think for the Trump administration, there also continues to be a bit of a tension between the isolationist elements of his regime who don't want to see the US contributing to foreign conflicts at all, and the Iran hawks who do want to see us able to go after Iran and its nuclear program on multiple levels. And I don't know which will win out when it comes to either getting involved in this war or coming to various partners' defense.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, Daryl Messenger had a question about targets beyond nuclear and military operations in Iran. There had been discussion in the past about strikes to weaken Iran's economy, striking oil fields and whatnot. I wonder if you could speak to that, if that has been at all in the discourse in the last 17 hours. And I want to add a second question, which is generally about Israel's military capacity in this moment, with all of these things happening. West Bank operations, Gaza, of course, campaigns, Syria, Lebanon, and a public that's really exhausted after all of this conflict since October 7. How does that impact the sense of the country? Obviously, you mentioned this is a moment of euphoria, but is this a threat at Israel's military being exhausted, stretched to its limits?
Okay, so I'll respond first. Hi, Daryl. Um, uh, well, I think that's sort of the next step Israel has thus far said it's containing its attacks and strikes only on military targets. It depends on Iran's response and retaliation, the decision of what Israel does next. I do think that because if we look at oil prices today, and there are things that, you know, that President Trump will actually care about, right? And the regional partners also, I think there is a hesitation, at least in Israel, or just keeping it sort of like in the escalation ladder to keep it to the next phase, and depends on what Iran does. All military targets, including personnel, as we've seen, are off. You know, this is off the bets, but the civilian ones not now. And you know, Iran has leverage there also, right? They can shut down the Straits of Hormuz. I don't know that they would do this. I think this will lead to direct confrontation probably with the United States because of its impacts on the global economy, and will come to much more leverage also, you know, pressure from China and Russia as well. But you know, this is where it gets even to the next level in terms of the Israeli military. So, you know, earlier, David, when did we speak? Maybe it was yesterday or the day before yesterday. There was obviously a bill that was brought to the Knesset for a vote on dispersing the coalition over the Haredi draft bill, which is really not a draft bill. It's giving them a exemption by law. There is a lot of discussion in Israel, not today though, about the fact that the IDF is short over 12,000 soldiers, the amount of, I mean, obviously casualties, but injuries, PTSDs, the reservists are drained, people are in reserves for, we're talking about 600 days now. I mean, we're getting close to the 2-year mark. And it's really not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the economy. This specific operation, right? Those that were working around the clock are the Air Force, and you know, intelligence support, but also bolstering defenses in the West Bank. Israel had a plan to have a whole new division along the border with Jordan. And it was, I think the plan was to have them there in a month and a half, and it's in advance, they're going to be deployed now, and in Gaza. But it's mostly around border defenses. We have to say that I don't think that this is the conversation in Israel today, but obviously if this is going to spill over to other fronts in a more aggressive ways than we're seeing at the moment, then we will again feel the toll on the reservists and the IDF. We do have to say, though, that I think there are mixed reports in Israeli press and in the US press also about sort of the IDF now occupies 77% of Gaza or 75% of Gaza, and the IDF is really fighting Gaza. If you look at what's really happening, there's really not a lot of fighting. And there are not as many soldiers as you would think in Gaza. I can't talk about the numbers, but they're not that many. And the progress is very, very, very slowly. And mostly the casualties we're seeing from IDF are from IEDs and RPGs, but there's not actually active fighting. The West Bank was put under closure. It is it is what it is. So I again, David, just to your question, I think all the major issues that have tore Israel apart in the last, you know, almost 3 years, really, when the judicial reform, judicial coups began, are still there. They're not weakened, but there's a rare moment of unity and happiness in Israel, at least with the strike. Just one anecdote, I don't know if you remembered, but some of Netanyahu's partners have said at the time when the Israeli Air Force pilots wrote some letters that they would only be willing to serve in a democracy. And there were issues that we had looked at, sort of reservists and most pilots. There were people in Netanyahu's government said, we don't need the pilots. And I think on a day like this, many Israelis are saying, well, we actually kind of do need the pilots, and this is a proof. So,
yeah. Rachel, I welcome your thoughts on what we should be looking for next. There's lots of questions, of course, in the Q&A about what we think are Iran's options for retaliation, given now these very successful attacks at so much of the senior military leadership. We haven't seen anything thus far in terms of ballistic missiles of note. And we also haven't seen anything from Yemen. But I wonder if you could take us through what you're looking for in the days to come as this situation unfolds.
Sure. I think it's certainly so much is unknown because it is still unfolding, and we're still learning all the different layers that Israel was able to penetrate and attack through even just the past 17 hours of operations. So I think one thing that I am watching for is what is coming out of Iran with respect to messaging and appointing new leadership, because a number of layers of decision making have been decimated, and a number of layers of sort of nuclear scientists who are part of the program have been targeted. So I do think it'll take some time for them to reconstitute and regroup. It's sort of reminiscent of Israel's attack on Hezbollah, where they went after so many different layers of leadership that there wasn't necessarily someone there at the end of the day to issue the command to go strike. So even if some of the capabilities are there, it might take them a minute to regroup and figure out what to do next. I also think about that Iran is creative. They tend to be very good at asymmetric attacks. And they tend to think on sort of a longer time horizon. So we saw this during the last two rounds of attacks in April, when was it, October last year, where, they telegraphed for a few days, well, we're going to attack, we're going to attack, we're going to attack, and then did. I don't know that we'll see that, but I don't think that from the Iranian perspective, it needs to be immediate. It needs to be sort of probably more symbolic. But I really do question how much of the capability that they had even 24 hours ago is still there. And I also think about how few proxies they have to deploy right now. The Houthis are among very, very few options with any amount of strategic depth. And what they can do vis-a-vis Israel seems to be pretty limited to a certain type of attack. Question will be, how much is Israel able to defend against both Houthi missiles, other drones, whatever else might be coming their way? And the fact that the US drew down embassies and military dependence, which doesn't often happen around the region, suggests to me that we as the United States are also on guard for retaliation against the United States, regardless of whether we do anything militarily. I think by association, Iran, and they've said this out loud, the US is part of what is within our right to do in retaliation. So I'll be watching what kind of messages come out of Iran, of Yemen, of the Houthis. And similar to Ambassador Huckabee's late night message, middle of the night Iran message last night, saying, we want no part in military attack, that was very awkwardly timed. And within minutes of news coming out about Israeli attacks, I'll also be watching for sort of errant comments like that.
Yeah, Shira, going back to Rachel's point about the proxies, is it surprising that this has not included additional Israeli attacks, at least as far as I understand, against the Houthis in Yemen? Do you expect that to be part of this campaign?
Maybe, but it's such as like a sideshow at the moment.
Hmm.
I think what's pretty remarkable is the fact that Hezbollah had a statement condemning Israel's actions, but not saying that they will join,
Yeah,
right? Because
truly
Hezbollah was really the deterrent, that was the reason that Israel never, I mean, at least the public reason why Israel has not done this earlier. And I think that's remarkable. So sort of the other proxies, the Iranian proxies with Israel, I don't know that the Houthis are now a priority. The missile, there was a missile, I think, that while we were doing this webinar, but it was launched toward the Jerusalem area. And actually, I think it hit a Palestinian area next to Hebron. So, but this is again not a priority, and so much of this, I'm speaking from an operational perspective, so much has been about prioritization here, right? What do we strike first? decapitated leadership, military assassinations at the beginning, and then the Air Force Command. And so I just don't see this at the moment happening. But maybe, depending, from the Iranian side, they are only left with the Houthis in a major way that is connected with them. It's not that others are not, they're just less capable to do something at the moment.
Yeah. Rachel and Shira, I want to thank you and Ambassador Shapiro for joining us in this short notice, and so many of you for joining us as well. I do want to know that you should all please subscribe to Israel Policy Forum's emails, follow the podcast. We'll have updates there. And of course, we will continue to have webinars such as these as these events unfold. We do also anticipate a special column by our Chief Policy Officer, Michael Koplow, to be published in the Atlantic magazine hopefully this afternoon, which we will make sure to distribute the link to those who are on this webinar. Please continue to turn to us as a resource. And thank you all for joining on such a short notice. Especially thank you to Rachel, Shira, and Ambassador Shapiro. Thanks all very, very much. And we will continue to track this unfolding situation, as our thoughts, of course, are with you, Shira, and all our friends and family as we continue to watch these news reports unfold.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.